name of the. Please join me in Gassho. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. Well, after a substantial break, thank you all for joining us again for the Shoshinge lectures. We I just want to go back just very briefly over a little bit of what we did previously so that people can sort of catch up to where we were. Can you all see that on your screen? I hope you can. Yeah. Okay. So basically, the Shoshinge, of course, was the song that was written by Shinran Shonin, a verse, and it was written within his largest, the canon of his work, the true teaching, practice, and attainment of the Pure Land Way, or the Kenjodo Shinjitsu Kyogyo Shomonrui, or Kyogyo Shinsho, abbreviated. And it comes at the end of what we call a chapter of practice, and it bridges between the practice and what we call shinjin, or interesting heart. So according to Jodo Shinshu, this entrusting heart is central to understanding of Shinran Shonin's teachings, or his understanding of Buddhism. And this entrusting heart comes from the work of Amida Buddha. For those of you who joined us on the Sunday service, I was talking about this past Sunday about the concept of what we call go-en in Japanese, or in English, I call it the serendipitous encounter. And so in life, we have many different encounters that either bring us together or bring phenomenal events to happen. But also when those causes and conditions no longer exist, then that phenomenal existence will also dissipate. So in understanding this, what Shinran Shonin, how he interpreted all of this was that when we have the heart to recite the Nembutsu, or Namo Amida Butsu, it is because of all the past conditions. And those past conditions, he ultimately sums it up as it is the working of Amida Buddha, who awakens us to the oneness of all existence. So this Kyogyo, the Shoshinge, it was basically broken up into two halves. The first half was based on the what we call the three Pure Land Sutras, and it's basically on the teaching itself. And then the second half was to show how this teaching developed, and it taught, and he introduces what we call the teachings of the seven patriarchs. And I've got it on your screen there. These are the seven patriarchs. And we've gone over the section of Nagarjuna. And Nagarjuna himself, what his input into the Pure Land teachings was that he said there is, in order to attain enlightenment, there were basically two practices, what he called the difficult practice and the easy practice. And the difficult practice, Nagarjuna explained, he compared to it as sort of traversing over land, like hiking over land. And it takes a lot of effort and energy. And the other practice, he said, was the easy practice. And that was to simply rely on this Buddha Amida. And it's sort of like getting on a boat and letting the boat do all the work as you go over the water. So if we're going to Vancouver Island using BC Ferry, we drive our vehicles onto the ferry, and then we let the fairy do all the work, right? So similarly, Nagarjuna said that there was this working of Amida Buddha. Now, the other thing that Nagarjuna, or one of the things that Nagarjuna is well known for, and this isn't necessarily to do with Pure Land Buddhism, but what we call the Madhyamika, or the middle path, he really emphasized. So the whole idea of what we call the Mahayana Buddhism, the larger vehicle Buddhism, one of the fundamental principles is this idea of sunyata, or emptiness. And this emptiness that Nagarjuna is talking about is not a nihilistic idea. It's not to say nothing exists, but he says everything is based on the interdependence. Everything is dependent on everything else. So there is no such thing as an independent entity. Okay, so because everything is based on everything else, one could say that nothing is coming in, nothing is going. And this is where it gets a little tricky. There's no birth, there's no death. A very famous sutra within the Mahayana teachings is the Heart Sutra. I know Suezon loves the topic of the Heart Sutra. But again, the idea that everything comes and goes, but it's all basically what it is a changing of dynamics, and that because there is no independent self, there is neither birth nor death. There's neither coming nor going. It's like seeing the waves on the ocean. The waves are there temporarily, but they're not an independent entity. They are the ocean. So Nagarjuna really emphasized what we call this middle path, not seeing either extremes. So you don't see a very finite object, but also you don't go to the opposite extreme of negating everything. They are both one and the same. It's like two sides of a coin. So birth and death are like the two sides of a coin. They're the same thing, basically. So there's constant birth going on and there's constant death going on all the time. So this is Nagarjuna. But for the Pure Land teachings, his emphasis or his input was this idea of the difficult versus simple, and that both are just as viable. It's not saying that the difficult practice is better or worse. They're both just as viable. And he also mentioned that for what Nagarjuna stated, though, was that through these practices, or through the easy practice, one can go directly to what we call the stage of non-retrogression. So this along the path to enlightenment, the traditional way of looking at Buddhism was that there are 52 steps to enlightenment. And the first 40 steps, you go through various stages, and you can go backwards as well. You can slide backwards if you're not diligent. But the 41st step is what we call the stage of the beginning of the Bodhisattva stage. And depending on the scholar, many will say the 48th step is the stage of non-retrogression. You go backslide from there. So Nagarjuna said that the easy path, the path of relying on Amida and getting on this boat, takes you directly to that 48th step of the 52. So that was Nagarjuna's input. And then we went over Vasubandhu's, or Tenjin Bosatsu in Japanese. And we spent the last two sessions before the break that we had talking about the Vasubandhu. And I began, he is well known. He is famous for what we call the commentary on the Pure Land Way. And this commentary, Shinan took as very important, and it's broken up into two parts. The first half is a verse, a song, and the second half is more of a prose. And in that first half, Vasubandhu begins by professing his faith in Amida Buddha. So with one heart, he relies on Amida Buddha. And then he continues on by describing the Pure Land, Amida Buddha, etc. And then the second half is a prose, and he talks about the going and coming. So going to the Pure Land, and he just gives the example. It's like going to this great mansion. And so at first you go into the large crowd, and then you get into the actual inner courtyard of the house, and then you get into the house, and then you finally see the treasure, and then you come back out again, but you've changed because you've seen that treasure. And now you're working to awaken those who have still yet to see that treasure, to awaken them. So Vasubandhu or Tenjin Bosatsu was explaining this, and his idea of relying on the Buddha with the one heart or one mind. I explained about that last time, how it is actually through the working of the Buddha that we attain this Ichin, the one mind, one heart, the entrusting heart. So we talked about that last time, and we completed the section on Vasubandhu. So this time, starting today, we're actually going to be talking about the next of the seven patriarchs. And I just going to bring that up for you to share with you. Okay. Excuse me for a second. Okay. And oops, sorry. So now we're going into the section on what the person that we call in Japanese Donnan Daishi, or Tanwan in Chinese. And he was actually the first of the Chinese great masters. Okay, so far we've gone over Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu. Both are Indian. Okay, and then as Buddhism spreads through to China, then you get the development of Buddhism in China. And Donnan is the first of there's three Chinese great masters. So we're going to talk a little bit about Donnan today. And it's interesting because at the time that Donnan comes about, Buddhism has established itself quite a bit. So there's already a long lineage of Buddhism. So you can see he was born in 476. And so if the Buddha passed away about 500 BC, it's been around just under 1,000 years now, okay, from the inception of Buddhism to the time Donnan comes into the picture. So over that 1,000-year period, as it develops, different schools develop, and they take more emphasis on history. And so by the time Donnan comes about, this idea of writing history becomes very important. So he's actually one of the first ones where there's an in-depth life history of this individual. Some of the like Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu, there are stories about them, but not as in detail as of Donnan. So, for instance, we see that Donnan was born in a place called Yanmen, located in northern China in the Shanxi province of what would be the Shanxi province today. And Suizon, I apologize if my pronunciation may not be the best, but it is what it is. Anyways, this Yanmen lied in the Wutaishan mountain range. There's a very famous mountain range known for both its Buddhist teachings, but also of its Taoist teachings. And Donnan became known as a great master in both of these, both Taoism and Buddhism. And it's said that he became a priest when he was 15 years old. And he became known primarily for studying this Madhyamika doctrine of the four discourse schools. And this four discourse schools based on the writings by Nagarjuna, the first of our seven patriarchs. Nagarjuna is widely seen as one of the earlier monks or important monks in numerous different schools of Buddhism. He is seen as the father of what we call Mahayana Buddhism. And so within that Mahayana Buddhism, we have different kinds of schools, like Pure Land Buddhism is one, Chan or Zen Buddhism is another lineage. We have Tiantai or Tendai Buddhism. These are all different branches, if you will. And many of them will consider regard Nagarjuna as sort of their founder, if you will. Of course, we all go back to the historical Buddha, but after the historical Buddha passed away, about 300 years after he passed away, this Nagarjuna came into the world, and he is seen to be responsible as a sort of the person that spread this Mahayana Buddhist movement. This movement that's based on sunyata, that because everything is dependent origination, everything is interdependent, it means also that there aren't any hierarchies. That's why it's called a larger vehicle, because Mahayana, which means larger vehicle, implies that all beings attain enlightenment together. Okay, so whereas with the Theravada, or the way of the elders, there's a very strict hierarchical demarcation where those who belong to the Sangha, the brotherhood, the ordained, those are the people that practice Buddhism, and the lay people, they just support it, sort of. They're not directly involved in attaining enlightenment, and how they understood it was through the merits of giving offerings in this life. You're hoping that the next life or in a future life, you can return. You've created enough causes so that you can return in a future life in a position to become a monk or a nun, to be able to join the Sangha. But for the lay people in this life, they're seeing that they're supporting the Sangha. So again, the Theravada ways are a little bit different from the Mahayana ways. And it was this Nagarjuna who really spread this Mahayana understanding. So Donnan was really influenced by Nagarjuna's teachings with this four discourse school based mainly on Nagarjuna's writings. And so we sort of keep that in mind as we proceed with Donnan. So what happens is Donnan, while he was doing his studies in the retreat or the mountain monastery that he was in, he was studying a Buddhist text called the Great Collection Sutras. And it's there that he becomes quite ill. And when he recovers well enough, he decides that in order for him to be able to complete his studies on the Buddhist text, that he needs to make sure that he lives for a long time. So he then, at that time, there was a great master of Taoism in the southern part of China. So he makes a journey to learn the ways of Taoist medicine in order to learn about how he could prolong his life. And so he makes this journey and he goes down to southern China, and there's this master Tao Hongjing, and this master recognizes already that Donnan is a very accomplished in Taoism. And so after Donnan studies under him, this Taoist master gives him a dozen volumes on the Taoist text and longevity. And so Donnan receives this, and he then proceeds to go back to his monastery. And during his trip back, it said that in the capital, the northern Chinese capital known as Luoyang, he encounters this Indian Buddhist translator by the name of Bodai Rishi. Bodai Rishi is very famous for introducing Buddhism into China. He is known for translating many, many different texts. And they just happen to have a chance meeting at a rest stop, and during their meeting, they have a discussion. And this would actually affect Donnan for the rest of his life. So during their encounter together, Donnan asked this Bodai Rishi, knowing that he's this great translator and great scholar of Buddhism, he asked him, are there any methods that he knows of that will prolong one's life? And so Bodai Rishi, hearing this, it's literally says that he spat on the ground in disgust and told Donnan that even if one could prolong one's life, it is only delaying death for a while. In the end, all things are transient and must decay. And at that point, Bodai Rishi said to given a copy, and there's a little bit of uncertainty here, but given him a Pure Land Sutra. And most scholars say he gave him a copy of what we call the Contemplation Sutra on Amida Buddha. The Contemplation Sutra we've discussed quite a while back is one of the three main Pure Land teachings. We have the larger sutra on Amida, we have the Contemplation Sutra, and we have the smaller sutra on Amida, or the Amida Kyo, the one that we often will chant at our temples. But the Contemplation Sutra is a very colorful sutra in that it starts off with that whole, they call it the tragedy of Rajagrihar. And in it starts off, and you've heard me tell this story before, but the whole story of the tragedy of Rajagrihar is about the King Bimbisara and Queen Vaidehi, and how the royal couple didn't have a child for many, many years, and they wanted an heir to the throne. So they go to see this mountain ascetic who's also a prophet, and they ask him, what they can do. And at that time, the ascetic tells them not to worry, that when he passes away, he will come back as their son. And of course, King Bimbisara, out of haste, he says, well, how long are you going to live? And the ascetic says, of course, nobody knows how long they're going to live for. And so King Bimbisara says, well, I want you to end your life now so that we could sort of speed up this process. And of course, the ascetic refuses, and that's when the king gets some of his guards to assassinate this ascetic. And just before he dies, he says, "Mark my words, I will get my revenge." Of course, then after he passes on, Queen Vaidehi becomes pregnant, and everything's going as planned and very well. But just before she gives birth to the baby, of course, King Bimbisara and Queen Vaidehi become very worried about the prophecy that was given. And so Queen Vaidehi ends up giving birth on top of this tower. And as soon as the baby comes out, they throw it off the tower. And miraculously, it just lands and it, completely unscarred except for one sorry I have to, sorry about that. I will get this out later, I guess. Let me just turn off my phone. Sorry. So yeah, so they worried and they do this terrible act, and the baby comes out unscathed except for one disfigured finger, baby finger. And of course, realizing the error in their ways, the king and queen then raise the child with all their love and that they could give. And the child is growing up normal as the prince, and everything is going well until the Buddha's cousin Devadatta asks the prince, now he's in his mid-teens, and Devadatta asks him, have you heard the story of what happened to your baby finger? And of course, Ajatasattu says, all I heard was that there was an accident when I was born. So that's when Devadatta, who is the thorn in the Buddha's life, Devadatta says to him, he gives him the whole story, the background story of what had happened, and sort of urges the Prince Ajatasattu to usurp the throne, that it belongs to him. So then, of course, Ajatasattu confronts the king, and when the king acknowledges that, yes, this happened, then Ajatasattu imprisons the king, and he's about to torture him by starving him to death. But of course, Queen Vaidehi goes to visit the king regularly, and before she goes, she bathes herself in honey and hides food in her clothes, and goes and feeds the king. So he remains healthy. And so Ajatasattu, after a period of time, not knowing this, asks the guard what has happened to the king. Has he passed on? And that's when he finds out that Queen Vaidehi has been going to feed the king. And so now he becomes really enraged with his mother, and he's about to take her life when his advisors tell him that, in the history of mankind, there have been sons who have killed their fathers to usurp the throne, but never has there been a case where a son has killed their own mother. And so he realized, okay, I can't kill her, but instead he gives her into house arrest. So he puts her in her quarters and confines her to her quarters. And that's when Queen Vaidehi then implores an audience with the Buddha, and then she says, I wish to be born into the Pure Land of Amida Buddha. And so the Buddha goes on to tell Queen Vaidehi, it's actually what we call 13 meditative practices. So he basically gives her step-by-step direction on how to visualize the Pure Land and Amida Buddha, and then ultimately be able to see this Buddha in the Pure Land. And then he goes on and talks about 3 non-meditative practices. But in the end, he basically ranks in this Contemplation Sutra. He says there are actually 9 grades of individuals, of human beings, and he ranks them from the highest of the high to the lowest of the low. And the lowest of the low, he says, even the lowest of the low, through receiving the teachings of Amida Buddha, can attain enlightenment. And in fact, he says, that the greatness of the teaching of Amida Buddha is that it's so all-encompassing that no one is left out, and including the lowest of the low. Or he says it's more, according to Shinan Shonin's understanding, that the focus is on the lowest of the low. And Vaidehi is considered to be a lowest of the low. She tried to kill her own son at birth. So anyways, this is a contemplation sutra. And the Vasubandhu's discourse okay, so yeah, I'm sorry. So Donnan when he encounters Buddha-Ruchi, is said to receive this contemplation sutra on Amida Buddha. And it's told that in the text lies a path to immortality. By solely practicing this method, you obtain deliverance from births and deaths. Okay, so again, when Donnan receives this from Buddha-Ruchi and they have this conversation, he realized there's something greater than longevity, and that's immortality. And he's saying through this Pure Land teachings, you will transcend birth and death. And so Donnan is so moved by this that he immediately burns the Taoist text that he had received into the fire. And for the rest of his life, he follows the Pure Land path. And his contribution to the Pure Land path is seen to be very important. Shinan Shonin respected Donnan immensely, along with Tenjin Vasubandhu. And I mentioned before that, Shinan got his name even from these two, Vasubandhu and Tanwan, or Donnan. So Shinan, Donnan, the second character. And so Donnan is known for writing a commentary on Vasubandhu's treatise on the Pure Land. And this is the commentary is known as Ojo Ronchu, okay, or in Japanese. As well, he's known for a poem in praise of the Buddha, Amida, or San Amida Butsuge, and in Japanese, and the abridged treatise on the meaning of the Pure Land of peaceful happiness, Ryakuron Annaku Jodogi. Okay, so anyways, he's known for these writings that he's done. But of course, the most well-known one is this commentary on the treatise written by Vasubandhu. And what's unique about Donnan is because in his earlier years, he was mainly focused on the Nagarjuna's writing. Donnan actually brings that into how to understand the Vasubandhu's teachings. Okay, so when we examine it, for instance, he bridges the two philosophies together. And this influences Shinran greatly and how to understand the Pure Land teachings. And so at the very beginning of the commentary, Donnan actually, so he's writing a book or a work that's commentating on Vasubandhu's writing. Okay, so the treatise of Vasubandhu. Yet the very beginning of that piece, that commentary, Donnan actually quotes from Nagarjuna's writing and states that there are two paths to the stage of non-retrogression, the difficult path and the easy path. And he gives 5 reasons why it is difficult to reach the stage of non-retrogression in an age where there is no Buddha. Okay? Remember, I mentioned before about the the three Dharma ages, the right Dharma age, the semblance Dharma age, and the last or the declining Dharma age. Makpo, we call it in Japanese. And so Donlan gives 5 reasons why it's difficult to reach the stage of non-retrogression using the difficult path. And he first of all says that during this age, non-Buddhist ways of doing what seems to be good are at variance with the Bodhisattva practice. The superficial, pretentious good is a hindrance to the Bodhisattva way. So what he's saying is that during this time, there are those who claim to be doing good, but it is all, he finds it very self-centered, or there's an agenda that is benefiting some, but maybe not all beings. So he says it's not really the Bodhisattva way. And the Hinayanistic pursuit of self-benefit obstructs the Bodhisattva's acts of great compassion. Pursuit of self-benefit also hinders the Bodhisattva way. So when he talks about Hinayanistic, this is a little bit, in today's Buddhism, we would say we don't really emphasize this. So what it was that the Mahayana Buddhists sort of looked down upon the Hinayana Buddhists. And what the Mahayana Buddhists were saying is that we're this larger vehicle. We're all inclusive. We're welcoming. Everybody's to attain enlightenment by themselves. Whereas they looked down upon the Hinayana Buddhists. Hinayana means smaller vehicle. And it was a derogatory term used by the larger vehicle Buddhists. And they were saying that, the Hinayana Buddhists are only in pursuit for their own enlightenment. They don't care about all those around them. So because of this, they said it's self-centered, a self-benefit. And so it's really not the Bodhisattva way, not this altruistic way where everybody is to attain enlightenment together. Okay. So he uses as one of the arguments, but in today's Buddhism, we don't really emphasize this. We would say, and we don't even call them Hinayana Buddhists. We call them Theravada, the way of the elders. And they just happen to be a little bit more orthodox, if you will. They followed the early teachings exactly to the T, or more to the T. So anyways, so that's the second one that he says why during this period it's a hindrance. And then he says evildoers who have no regard for consequences destroy the meritorious virtue that accrues from the practices of others. So basically, non-Buddhists who don't really fear consequences or think of retributions that happen through our actions, they destroy the meritorious virtue that accrues from the practices of others. If we look at our own world that we live in, with the environmental destruction that's going on and global warming, et cetera, we are responsible for creating this very harmful world that we're in. And so we are, in fact, the evildoers. The result of good deeds based on deluded thinking distract the sacred practices. Again, this is sort of this very short-focused or narrow-focused way of thinking of good and bad. And so we sometimes think that we're doing good, but in fact, in the larger picture, we're not necessarily doing so. Relying solely on one's own power, one misses the support of other power. So Donnan was the first person to really bring in this idea of other power, where Nagarjuna talked about, going on the boat of Amida, he didn't really come out specifically to say, call this other power working of Amida, whereas Donnan is the first one to really bring this out, other power versus one's own power. So egocentric power versus power through Amida. Okay. And then, interestingly enough, in his commentary on Vasubandhu's writings, Donnan actually raises questions that people even raise today, and he tries to answer these questions. And as an example of this, for instance, he comments on Vasubandhu's opening line of the hymn in the treatise on the Pure Land, and which Vasubandhu begins by saying, "I take refuge in Amida Buddha." So Donnan, in his commentary, examines this passage, asking if there is no such thing as self. So he's looking at it from this middle path, this idea of sunyata, that there's no independent self. He says, if self is non-existent in Buddhism, then who is taking refuge? Right? If there is no I, then who? When I say, or when Vasubandhu says, "I take refuge," well, isn't that contradictory? And so then Donnan looks at what self is, and he explains it in three different ways. The first is a wrong view. He says, when a person has a wrong view of a permanent spirit. So this is often the very base understanding of self. When I say I think that I'm going to last forever without change in this very specific existence. So he says that's a very wrong view to take of self. And then he says, when a person speaks of oneself with self-conceit, so a very egocentric way of thinking. And then finally, he says, to identify a teaching or to help in the understanding of an abstract idea. So here, Donnan saying the self is very much like looking at the wave. So we see, we acknowledge that the existence of the wave, but we don't see it as something that's permanent and unchanging. We see it as a phenomenon that exists, but it helps us in grasping abstract ideas. Another example of answering a common question is when he's explaining about the unhindered light shining throughout 10 quarters, which is often used to describe Amida Buddha. And along with his explanation of this term, he talks about the mind of the Nembutsu, that simply reciting the name will not provide anything. That is only when the right mind is present that Nembutsu becomes true and real. And he talks about this pure mind or the right mind as being a sincere, single-mindedness and continuous mind. And that they are all, they can be classified as three, but they are actually all interdependent. So Donnan became so well renowned during his life that the emperor at the time, the Emperor of Liang, ordered Donnan to stay at this temple called Dayansi Temple in the northern capital. And however, Donnan himself, he was more of a mountain. He enjoyed the life on the mountain monastery. So it said that although he stayed in this Dayansi temple for a period of time, in his latter years, he goes back to his mountain monastery. And it's recorded that the emperor, on a daily basis, would turn to the direction of Donnan. He respected him, and he saw Donnan. The emperor considered him like a bodhisattva. And so daily, he would turn in the direction of where Donnan's residence was, and he would bow in respect. So when we look at the Shoshinge, the lines So these are there's 12 verses or 12 lines associated with the story of Donnan. And it begins here, and you see it. Turning toward the dwelling of Master Tanwan, the Emperor of Liang always paid homage to him as a bodhisattva. Okay, so this is what I just said, that the emperor paid homage to him. And then it goes on to tell the story of how Donnan became a Pure Land master. And he says, Bodhi Ruchi, master of the Tripitaka, gave Tanwan the Pure Land teachings. And Tanwan, burning his Taoist scripture, took refuge in the land of bliss. Okay, so that's exactly what I just talked about. So in his commentary on the treatise of Bodhisattva Vasubandhu, Donnan shows that the cause and attainment of birth in the fulfilled land lie in the vow. What he means by this is that both the cause and the attainment of birth in the Pure Land is based on the vow of Amida Buddha. In the vows, in the 22nd vow, it said that once we, through the working of the Buddha, those who have gone before us can return back to this earth to aid those who are in suffering. And so both the going and coming back, Donnan now says is actually part of the working of the vow. Our going and returning directed to us by Amida come about through other power. So this is where he's this tariki in Japanese is introduced. That it's all through the working of Amida Buddha that we both go to the Pure Land, but also come back from there to help guide those who are still in delusion. And he says the truly decisive cause is Shinjin. Shinjin is that entrusting heart. So when we receive the working of the Buddha and we awaken to that working, we this entrusting heart or Shinjin comes about. And again, he says this is not something I cultivate, but it's something I receive through the working. Okay. So when a foolish being of delusion and defilement awakens Shinjin, he realizes that birth and death itself is itself nirvana. Again, here Donnan is bringing in the ideas of Nagarjuna. So he talks about this awakening. He's commenting on Vasubandhu's writing, the treatise on the Pure Land Way, and how, as I mentioned in the prose section, they're talking about going towards this mansion, and that analogy is also going to the Pure Land. But then once we get there, we return back to this world to guide others. And so he says that when he's talking about birth and death here, he's using sort of the ideology from Nagarjuna that there is no birth, no death. And so it's the same as nirvana. It's not like you have birth and death here and nirvana somewhere out here. The truth encompasses also finite, if you will, our egocentric selves. And then without fail, he reaches the land of miserable light and universally guides sentient beings to enlightenment. So again, this is that idea. Once we get there, we come back to guide others. And we know that Shinan Shonin paid great homage to Donnan because in the Wasan, on the 7 patriarchs, he actually has 34 hymns specifically on Donnan. And in comparison, like Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu, I think there were like 10. So, 3 times as much he's talking about Vasubandhu or Donnan. So next time I'm going to start off by going through some of these And then we'll continue on from there. So from here, from Donnan, then we have Doshaku or Tao Cho in Chinese. And then we have Shantao or Zendo. And Shantao is also somebody that influenced Shinan Shonin a lot. Both Shinan Shonin and Shinan Shonin's master, Honen Shonin, was really influenced by Shantao. So we'll continue on with this Donnan by going through these hymns. And then, as I mentioned, these hymns were written when Shinan was much older. So the Shoshinge itself was part of the Kyogyo Shinsho, the canon of Shinan's work, and that was written between the ages of 53 to 76. He wrote original drafts and then went over, constantly going over them, rewriting parts and putting footnotes, etc., etc. And then when he turned 76, his attention turned from basically the other monks from other schools who he wrote this Kyogyo Shinsho for, and his focus then turns more to the lay people or the followers that had grown around him. And so because of that, the way of writing also changes, and he uses a much more simplistic Japanese format. And one of the more prolific ways that he did this was through poems or hymns. And we went through some of the ones with pertaining to Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu. And then these 34 in particular are based on the writings of Donna or Tanwan. So these were written in a way so that the average person could interpret or understand the teachings in a much easier language. Okay, so we'll go over this next time. But that's what I wanted to share with you this evening. I hope it wasn't. It might have been too difficult. I don't know. Are there any questions that you have or comments or? Again, I thank you for being patient with me. 2 weeks we had planned to miss because of our Hanamatsuri schedule and the AGM, and it happened that I was sick during those 2 times, anyways. And then last week I just wanted an extra week to recoup from the COVID. So as you can tell, I'm pretty well recovered. So I look forward to. Oh, so next week we'll have one. Let's see. Let me just look at my calendar. There's one one Tuesday that I have to. Oh yeah. Next week I'm going to have to postpone because I'm going to Manning Park from the 20th to the 22nd, the Manning Park retreat. And so it doesn't really give me time to prepare to come back Monday and to do it for. So there won't be a class on the 23rd, basically is what I'm trying to say. Okay. But we should hopefully get through this Shoshinge by mid-June. Oh. Okay. And again, if you have any questions that you want to email me, I will try to answer it. Might take me a little time trying to catch up on some other stuff as well, same time. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you.
It helps to give a lot of clarity, so thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, good night, all.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.